There's now been data from a number of different products that demonstrate that we're probably going to be able to get a vaccine in some time frame. I think with the Moderna vaccine, what we know now is the vaccine produces antibodies. Not all those antibodies were neutralizing antibodies. So the antibodies that are produced in the 45 subjects, we know that they bind to the virus. We only know that in 8 of the cases, the antibodies were in fact neutralizing antibodies, meaning that they'll actually eliminate the virus. And that's not because the data was negative. It's just because we don't have a complete data set yet. They only had data on 8 of 8 subjects demonstrating neutralizing antibodies. But you can infer from that in the other subjects, once we get that data, probably some proportion of them, maybe all of them, but certainly some proportion of them are going to also be neutralizing antibodies. And I think that's why people are encouraged. It's a vaccine that demonstrates that it can produce antibodies in people, and that those antibodies should be useful for targeting the virus and eliminating the virus.
How common is it, Dr. Gottlieb, for promising early results to have more difficulty when they get to sort of larger trials, especially for promising treatments and vaccines like this one?
Right. Well, this is very early. I think why people are enthusiastic is we weren't sure whether or not the mRNA approach to developing a vaccine was going to work at all. And what we're seeing now is that using this approach, and Pfizer also has an approach similar to this, but using this approach, you can develop a construct that in humans can produce antibodies against the virus. But it's a long road ahead. They have to figure out how to manufacture it. They have to figure out what the right dose is. We don't know how durable the protection will be, and we don't know how extensive it's going to be. So there's a lot of unanswered questions. And in fact, in this trial, they had 3 different doses, a 250 microgram dose, a 100 microgram dose, and a 25 microgram dose. It appears that the 250 microgram dose produced fever, and they're not taking that forward. And it also appears that the 25 microgram dose probably didn't produce a robust enough immune reaction. And they don't seem to be taking that one forward either, although it's still early. It's not really clear what they're going to do. But the subsequent trials are going to test that 100 microgram dose, and they also added a 50 microgram dose. So dose finding is also key, trying to figure out what the right dose is, because you don't want to give so high of a dose that it's going to produce too robust of an immune response that you're going to have a reaction to it, to the vaccine itself. But you want to give a sufficient amount of vaccine that people are going to get a durable response. And so they have to figure out what that right dose is, so they need to do some additional studies. So there's a number of hard roads ahead, and then they have to figure out how to manufacture it at scale. And converting from, an experimental type platform, manufacturing this on an experimental platform, to figuring out how to manufacture it, the very high amounts that you're going to need to commercialize it, that's a pretty complex process. In 2009, as we went from, went to commercial scale manufacturing with the H1N1 swine flu vaccine, as we went from the production runs that we were using in the clinical trials to the production runs that we needed for the commercial manufacturing, we found that we weren't getting the yield that we expected. And we, in fact, lost 2 months of time doing that. So a lot of things can go wrong. There's a lot of complexity. It's still early, but this is encouraging nonetheless.
Dr. Gottlieb, when the dust has settled on all of this and we're at the end of 2022 and the whole world has been vaccinated, if that plays out as we hope it will have done, is this a winner-takes-all race at the moment? Will we all have been vaccinated by just one company's vaccine that whoever gets first will be produced across around the world, or will there be multiple vaccines that end up getting used?
I think there's going to be multiple vaccines. There's a lot of different approaches underway. Each might have certain pros and cons associated with it, and each vaccine might be useful in certain populations. So we might be using these vaccines in a bespoke way with different populations of people. Some vaccines more productive in younger people, some vaccines used in older populations. And I think that also it's probably not going to be the case that one manufacturer can supply the entire U.S. market, let alone the entire world. If you look at the flu vaccine, you have multiple manufacturers in that space, each taking a slightly different approach, and there's enough room in the market for multiple manufacturers to do that profitably. Also, when you look across the landscape, some companies are taking a very novel approach. This mRNA approach is a new approach. Some are using an adenoviral vector like Johnson & Johnson, or the construct being used by AstraZeneca that was licensed from Oxford University. Other people are taking a very traditional approach. So Sanofi's taking a more traditional approach. So are the Chinese vaccine manufacturers. The Chinese vaccine manufacturers, for the most part, the 3 largest projects that they have underway, take a very old approach.
So you are the perfect person to ask this because you used to run the FDA. What is the path forward from here for Moderna to get FDA approval?
Well, it's hard to say, so I'll speculate. I think Moderna is going to probably have to do multiple phase 2A and maybe 2B trials to test different doses. They're also going to have to look at this vaccine, and they have these trials now starting to get underway in different populations, including the target populations, which are going to be older adults. But I think that the FDA is going to want them to get the dose right and do some large-scale phase 2 studies to make sure that they're taking the right dose forward, because it's probably going to be the case that we're not going to be able to take multiple vaccines forward in big phase 3 clinical trials in multiple doses. We're just not going to have the clinical trial capacity to do that. And the other thing is that starting to enroll clinical trials this summer or even the early fall is probably going to be difficult because we don't know what the incidence of coronavirus is going to be in the population. I suspect that the incidence is going to fall as we get into July and August. And we also don't know where it's going to be epidemic, where the outbreaks are going to be come this fall. And so you're going to want to probably wait until the fall until you can figure out where the virus is going to be until you start to enroll those really large trials. They'll try to get them underway earlier, but the enrollment's really going to get boosted once you figure out where the virus is spreading in the fall. And hopefully it doesn't become epidemic nationally, but we will have outbreaks in cities and maybe states, and those are the places where you're going to want to deploy the vaccine and run those trials.